And it always sort of makes me nervous that people are going to see a car at this stage and think, oh, it's not much of a car. Jag time. Right, here we are again. Last time, what were we doing last time? We were talking about the suspension, we were doing the rear axle location, we were doing the steering rack conversion on the front and generally having dilemmas over steering angles and such. And then we were just going over the interior design work, and we were talking about the fact that we were going to drop the engine and box out so we could finish the engine bay fabrication, which we've obviously now done. We completed all of that rear end fabrication relating to the axle location, and then we dropped the engine out so we could finish the engine bay metalwork, which we've almost done now. We've basically finished plating in all these areas where we've had to sculpt out for clearance on the aircon compressor and on the power steering pump, completed the welding on the engine mounts, and then we were able to finish these areas of bulkhead down here and over there where we weren't able to get to with the engine in. The only bit we haven't finished is the air intake area. We're just waiting for that carbon airbox to be made at the minute. That should be here probably within, I reckon, the next week. At which point we'll get that lot back on there and just with the actual final airbox in place, finish the fabrication on that section of inner wing over there where the air intake's actually going to be. Didn't really want to do that just based off the drawing, just because it's got to be quite precise because of the way, you know, the engine will move to some extent, and we want to have the hole not excessively large but big enough to allow the engine to move as much as it will, so it's got to be quite precise. So that's the last bit to do over there. Yeah, another thing that we've done is on the side of the transmission tunnel there, we wanted a bit of extra clearance for the exhaust and a clutch footrest, so we've kind of killed two birds with one stone there and done an enlarged section of transmission tunnel which actually is the right shape to then form a clutch rest. But yeah, engine bay pretty much there. Just a little bit more provision to do for the final kind of routing of wiring and plumbing, which we'll do when the engine's back in to do the air intake, and we'll be done metalwork wise then. And to be honest, there's light at the end of the tunnel now on the metalwork side of things, full stop. We've made good progress on the interior, so we'll come around and have a look at that now. Right, oh, this is where the big changes have happened since the last episode. So we've been working on all the metalwork fabrication to basically make the concepts that we came up with for the interior come to reality. Now, the vast bulk of this is fabricated in steel, with the exception of this main fascia panel here, which is aluminium. We started with the dash top panel there, and put a tube in across the top here, which adds a fair bit of stiffness to the shell. And it's just got a slight upward curve to it. Fabricated this dash top section, that's going to be foamed and leathered. That'll be black leather on the final thing, and we'll probably have a French seam running along the front of here just to add a nice detail to it. There's then another tube under here, which serves to mount the lower part of those fascia panels, but also mounts some of the heavier items behind here, like the heater box. It also mounts the steering column on this side, so it kind of mounts the more structural parts. That tube is bolt in, because with the tube in place you can't actually get the heater into there. So we've made that bolt in. We made some plinths on the inside of the pillars here to bolt that into. We've then made this sort of trim panel that sits over the top of that. That'll also be foamed and trimmed in black leather. There's vents that sit at the side here, which I actually have got here. We've had these made. These are basically just billet machined alloy vents. They were made by Restomod Air in the States. Pretty nice piece, and they're actually, you can get two different looks by rotating the ball a different ways. So they will sit when it's all done on each side in there, and one obviously this side. So hopefully giving you a pretty significant improvement over the original setup, which didn't really have any face vents on the heating system at all. The original system had a small vent down here to generally provide warm air to the cabin, and 2 demist vents, which we will also be reinstating. There's going to be a slot put into the dash top here and here for the demist outputs, and there are foot vents as well, and you'll be able to switch between those. That's one of the beauties of these vintage air heater units, is that you've got directional control basically between the 3 different air directions. These fascia panels are made in aluminium, and they'll be hydro-dipped with a wood grain when we finish them. With the door panels, we're actually going to keep them quite true to the original design. You have these wooden trim panels at the top, which obviously we're going to refinish, but we wanted to carry that on the original car. The wooden dash is kind of this full height here, and it doesn't really tie into the look of the door card at all. There was no sort of correlation between the two. And one of the key things we wanted to introduce was something that tied the two together. So that's why we've done the dash at this height here, and why we've got these on at the moment, was to check the size of that. So the wood grain on this will actually flow around into the wood grain of the dash, which then obviously drops down into the full height and then flows into the other side. And when we do the leather on the door cards also, there'll be a large black section at the top here with the sort of tan colour that's planned for the rest of the interior below that, which will then flow into this black leather section at the bottom of the dash here, to try and sort of tie the look together a lot more than it was originally.
Stay flat across the...
So we've got the media screen in the dash there. That's an Alpine freestyle unit, and we've been using those on quite a lot of our builds. One of the problems we've found is that on a touchscreen head unit, obviously there's plenty of those around, it's very difficult to use a touchscreen whilst you're actually driving, and there's lots of things you want to do whilst you're on the move, just changing the volume, changing the radio station, or whatever it might be. You look at most modern cars, they've got controls on the steering wheel or maybe on the centre console to kind of complement the touchscreen. And on these Alpine freestyle units, there's like a little button packs that go with it, which you can mount next to the screen, but you can mount them remotely as well. And we've been using those generally mounted down in the centre console. So you've got sort of control over the common things, answering the phone, volume up and down, changing the station, switching between different audio sources, switching to nav, all of those different things you can do just by reaching down and pressing the buttons. So you haven't got to be looking at the screen and trying to work out where your hand's got to be. But then obviously you get full functionality with sat nav and all the things that go with it. There's a 9-inch screen on this one as well, which is bigger than the ones we've generally used before, but it fits nicely with the size of this dash. So that should be really nice. The instruments we designed in collaboration with Classic Instruments in the States. They're actually on their way over here now. So dependent on whether they get delivered between now and this video editing being finished, we might actually get some footage of those. We'll find out. But we put a lot of influences in from original Mark II Jag instruments, and also from some of the Rolls-Royce instruments from around the kind of 60s and even the late 50s. And we've done them all with kind of the old school Smiths fonts, little white needles with red tips on them, kind of very, very much 1950s, 1960s classic British sort of look to them. So really excited to get those in, but obviously all really up-to-date electronic internals on them. So excited to get those in place. The steering column, we've completed the sort of fabrication work on that, getting it mounted. We're going to use the original switch stalk, it's a pretty nice classic looking thing, and we've actually decided we can probably use a modified version of the original shroud here. So we've already modified this a bit to work with this lower shroud here, and what we're likely to do is then do a 3D printed extension on here which will bond into that, and then we'll either trim this in leather or flock it or something along those lines, because it's quite a nice looking thing. Actually, one of the things we were wondering about doing is something with this little window. There's a window here that's normally the gear indicator on an automatic, But on the manual ones, it just has something in here that says overdrive that would have lit up when it was put into overdrive, and it's got the indicator telltales. Our telltales are going to be on the instrument faces, so we were wondering whether we could incorporate something cool into that little display there. So actually, if anybody's got any ideas on that, it would be interesting to hear them. This is original. It's quite cool. The reach adjustment on the steering, still too tight there, which is just an original Jag feature. It's just a little lock ring that you loosen and tighten to set the steering in and out position. We've done the seatbelt anchorages now. It's a standard shoulder position, but they didn't have inertia reel belts, so we've done the mounting points down the bottom for inertia reel seat belts on it. Obviously, prior to doing that, we also did the seat mounts. The seats, which you can see I'm sitting in, they're XJ40 Daimler seats that we're using on this. We've actually used those on a couple of projects as well. And they're quite a nice option because they're quite slim looking. If you try and use more modern seats on a lot of classic cars, they tend to look too bulky and just a bit bloated looking. And these are modern enough that you've got all the electrical functionality. So they're completely electric, height at the front and base, slide back and forth. The angle of the back's electric. They've got heating elements in them, and they've got these really cool little, I don't think they're fitted on this one, but they've got a little tray table on the Daimler version that pops out for the rear seat passengers. But they don't look bulky, they look quite in keeping with a classic car, so that's what we've gone for on this. So we've done the fabrication work on the floor here to mount those. So yeah, in terms of the interior, we're really kind of getting there. We're going to do the centre console still. Now I don't know whether we'll completely make that at this stage or whether we'll just do the mounts for it. But we've got a console that will extend down and back here, go around the gear stick. It'll have the audio controls at the back here. You'll have the climate control switches here, and also switches for anything else. Things like the headlights, wipers, that kind of thing are going to be on switches down there. So you'll have indicate and main beam and dip beam on the stalk, and the rest will be on the switches on the console there. You can see also in here we've done the clutch rest there, and that all sits quite nicely, although the clutch at the moment is just flopping around. If you hold that at the right height to match the brake, it's really quite nice pedal positions. They're not too far apart, but just comfortable. Should be lovely. We actually had the owner here a few weeks back when we had all of this kind of roughly mocked up into place before we'd done the seat mounts, so he could sit in it and make sure he was happy with the position of everything. We basically put the seat in the middle of all its adjustment electrically, got him comfortable in the seat, and then did the mounts at that point, so you've got the maximum amount of travel outside of his seating position. But yeah, it'll look good. I think one of the changes we're going to do is a smaller steering wheel on here. We're planning at the moment, I think, to make our own steering wheel for it, which will just be a billet machined frame that will then do 3D printed profiles to make it around here, and then just trim the whole lot in leather. To be honest, it's looked basically like this for the last week, but it's just been doing all the details under the skin of this dash, which has taken the time. So just putting together the way it's all mounted and the way everything's fixed properly, and thinking through how it's going to go together when we actually build it, to make sure it's actually possible and reasonably easy to put it all together. And making sure there's an order that everything goes together, and not kind of backing ourselves into a corner where we end up putting a component in and then finding we can't then get to the nuts, the bolts, or whatever that hold it all together. So there's quite a lot of just thinking stuff through and making sure that it actually goes together in a pleasing fashion. So basically when it goes through to be built, it's not just lots of swearing.
You had the owner come in and obviously sit down and stuff like that. Did you also have like talks about colour again or anything like that?
I think he got to the point where he's definitely convinced it wants to be green, and it's just deciding what green. And he went to the London Classic Car Show a couple of weeks back, And there was a car there who really liked the look of, which was a green colour. And then interestingly, I looked through the thread on our Facebook page where we talked about the blue versus green, and actually somebody had mentioned the exact same green, and I did think it looked nice. And there was another one on there, a more modern green, somebody pointed out. I suspect one of those might end up being the final colour. I'm not going to tell you what they are at the moment. They're actually remarkably similar, considering one's a 1950s green and one's like I think it's a 2000, it's early 2000s anyway. So there's nearly 50 years between them, but you open the tins and one's a little bit more metallic than the other, and that's about it really. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what they turn out like. Still got to decide the final leather colour, although we're fairly convinced by that one. And then the wood grain, we've already done 3 or 4 trial samples for the exact pattern and colour of the wood that we're going to do. One of those was extremely close, but we're going to do a second version of it that's just slightly darker, see if that looks a bit more how we want it. But yeah, we're getting close with all of that. And there hasn't really been a massive hurry because we've still not even got they've not even finished the metalwork, and then there's obviously going to be weeks of body prep before we're putting the final paint on as well. So, we're at least a month out still from needing to have a final colour choice, but it's still nice to have in your head a good plan and sort of to look forward to how it's going to look.
Any standout comments from YouTube or Facebook? Has the Barra stuff stopped?
Yeah. I think on the last one it had. I think the last time we were talking a lot about the Ackerman and bump steer and lots of geometry related chat. I think I'd said that there can't be many Jags out there with rack and pinion steering that actually handle well. And it was interesting, there were a few people that piped up saying, well, I've got one and it's fine. But there were also a lot of people who commented saying, yes, I've had the same problem. So that was interesting to see, that people with first-hand experience of the issues we suspected that people might have had with rack and pinion converted Mark II Jags. So that was good to see. You
had the customer here. He was sat down. Did he make any vroom vroom noises?
I can't remember, he might have done actually. I can't remember. He was certainly excited, he always is, and it's great to see. I think I've probably said this before, but it's always nerve-wracking that when a car's at this stage, and there's already a lot of money in this car at this stage, people perhaps won't have the vision to sort of see how it's going to look eventually. And it always sort of makes me nervous that people are going to see a car at this stage and think, oh, it's not much of a car. But he seems to, totally have the vision to see it at the end, and he's always excited to see it, even at this stage when it's just sort of bare bones. So yeah, he was absolutely in high spirits and excited to see it push forward, and kind of was getting into the zone with trying to push this final colour decision, which obviously when you get to this stage, it's the kind of exciting thing. It's the next big step that you're looking forward to, really, is seeing it painted. And obviously we're all excited to see that as well, so that's the next biggie. Is mounted off that lower tube. Steering column's mounted off this tube. What the almost impossible to use when you're on the move. Some more curvature here and there, so that was... Who'd have thought, when nobody's here, really, it's literally loads worse than normal. There's beeps going off, people wazzing around over there, doors opening, closing.